You are here to listen to Stephanie Gerding, who is an internationally known consultant, librarian, author, and trainer. She wrote the book, she authored the book Winning Grants, a How to Do It manual for librarians with multimedia tutorials and grant development tools. She has in-depth knowledge and practical experience, having worked on all sides of the grant process. She plans and conducts training around the world, and we're very happy to have her here with us today. Thank you, and go ahead, Stephanie.
Great, thank you, Shelley. It's great to be here with you all today. I am out of Seattle, Washington, so nice to join you. My mom's side of the family is from Minnesota, so I have been to Minnesota quite a few times. And as Shelley said, I've been on all sides of the grant process. So I've written grants, I've reviewed grants, I've been the grant maker giving out the grants, and then I'm often the person now who's hired to carry out the work of the grant as well. So I'm happy to be able to share with you today. So what we'll be talking about today is we're going to go over the basic process of grant work, and then talk about how to develop grant projects, and really talking about how to focus on community needs and planning. And I think planning is one of the big keys for grant work. We're going to really briefly talk about how to find library grant funding sources. You also have a handout that goes over all this as well. And then I'll give tips on writing a proposal and what funders are really looking for. And I'm hoping by the end of this that you'll be really excited and confident about grant work. I have really come to enjoy doing it, and I love seeing all the great projects that libraries are able to do with grant funds. So I wanted to start off finding out a little bit about you all. So in the chat, if you could share what library you're from, and then also how new you are to grant work. So share about how many grants that you've written. If you've written 0, if you've written 1 to 5, if you've written 5 to 10, 10 to 15 we'll say, or too many to count. I think I'm at too many to count at this point. Oh, great. Okay. Worthington School District 10. Good. I'll give you a little bit of time to type in. Shelley, we can see your mouse going across the screen, I think. At least I can. I don't know if they can. Okay, only ones for practice. 0, 3, public library. Community college, great. Practice is good too. All right, I see you all typing away. Oh, great. The County Historical Society, wonderful. What I'm seeing here are some great opportunities for partnerships here with grants as well. We'll talk about that. Okay, public library 1 to 5, written 12 as a grant reviewer, wonderful. I think I've learned the most about grant work from being a grant reviewer, so that's a wonderful experience to have. Okay, Minnetex, great. Hennepin County. Many, okay. 1 to 5. Okay, so we have quite a variety of experience here, so that's really great. So definitely during this webinar, if you have written grants before, definitely chime in with any tips that you have. I'll keep my eye on the chat, so definitely let us know anything that you would share, and I'll give you opportunities for that as well. But thank you all for being here. If you are brand new, those of you that have 0 or don't have a lot of experience, don't worry about that, because we really will go through all the basics. And the really nice thing is that as a librarian, or even in your historical society work, you have a lot of valuable experience that really applies to grant work. So one thing for sure is that we're really good at finding information, and that's a lot of what grant work is about. So you're finding out about funders, you're finding out where those grants are, you're finding out about what your community needs and what those good grant projects would be. And then answering questions, that's definitely something that we're good at. And if you think about it, that's really what the grant proposal is. You're answering a lot of questions. and serving the community, something that we all do as well. And that's really what funders want, right? They're giving you money to help the community and to help people in your community. And then relationship building, and that's a big part of grant work as well. The other thing is that libraries have really great reputations. So that's why I've got this fuzzy cute little chick, because a lot of people have, you know, those fuzzy warm feelings about going to libraries. And why this is so beneficial is that because often you're competing against other organizations, maybe nonprofits, and they really have to work hard to establish their reputation. Most people, even though they might not know everything that we do in our organizations, in our libraries these days, they do trust us. And so they don't think that we're going to take the money and run off to Aruba or something like that, right? We do have really good reputations as being trustworthy. And so that's a really great benefit, that we don't have to spend our time really trying to establish that like a new nonprofit might need to do, or somebody that other people wouldn't be familiar with. So this is the grant process cycle from my new book, which I'll share at the end, but we do have a revised edition that just came out in January. And so in the book, we go through all of these steps in the grant process cycle, and we'll go through these today as well. So the first step is planning. And this is a really important fundamental part of grant work, is really being able to plan. And if I could have you remember one thing from this whole presentation, this is what it is, that it's about the people, it's not about the money, and it's not about the stuff. So we'll talk more about what that means. But really thinking about that funders, they aren't just interested in giving away money. They're not just interested in buying you computers, but they're wanting to help people, and that's what they need to see. And so this is a really important thing to keep in mind throughout the grant process. So we'll talk more about this as we go on. So I've got 4 steps that we can take as we're doing our grant work, but really the fastest way to success is by planning, and trying to get it in writing is a really good thing. And that's one of the things I love about grant work, is that it does force us really to plan and to put it into writing. And what I've found is that process itself is so beneficial. So I've seen so many libraries that maybe they don't get the first grant, and sometimes I've seen libraries that don't even get a grant, but they're still able to go ahead with some part of the project and complete that project. So I think grant planning is really beneficial that way, because it makes us stretch and think about innovative ideas and innovative solutions. So let's talk a little bit about how you should start off. So it's definitely by thinking about the community that your library serves and your organization, and what those top needs are. So really important to think about your community. And by community, I just mean whoever it is that you're serving and wherever you are. So whether you're at the Historical Society, or you're at a public library or school library or an academic library, just really thinking about that broader community and taking some time to figure out what are those big needs that are going on, because those big needs are the things that the funders are going to want to fund as well. So there's a lot of different ways that you can find out what your community needs are, right? You can do more formal needs assessments, doing focus groups, surveys, interviews, those kind of things. You can also look at what data is already out there, looking at public records. And then I think just thinking about current issues. What is it that people are concerned with right now? What is it that they're focused on? What are the politicians talking about? Any of those kind of things. And depending on the size of your organization and how much has been done before, really depends on how much time you want to put into this step. Now it may be, if you already have a strategic plan, that you already have some of this done for you, and if so, that is wonderful. If you've got a good strategic plan, then a lot of your work is done already in these first steps. You can really take that information and use it. The other thing to think about is, has anyone else done a needs assessment? So sometimes larger nonprofits will do a community needs assessment. or your city might have done a needs assessment, or a county, any of those larger organizations. So seeing what else is out there. But the other thing I really advise you to do is doing a few key interviews with a few leaders in your community. That is a really good way to find out what's going on. So what I would tell you to do is when you're meeting with someone, and interview it's really more of a conversation, so don't get intimidated by interview, but really sitting down with a community leader and talking to them about the people that they serve. And you have to be careful to not frame it by, saying, oh, we're going to write a grant for the library, and, how can the library help? And the reason for this is that people have their own perceptions of what we do with libraries, and they might think, oh, well, they're asking me what books to order, right? They think about books. But instead really having them talk about what are people coming to you about, what are their problems, what's keeping them up at night, thinking about those big social problems, and really trying to keep it broad that way. And then, sometimes this can seem overwhelming, but I think it's really about trying to think about that. Do you have people that need to find jobs or that are homeless, or, what are those big issues? And then really trying to prioritize. We can't do it all, but what are those things that you really want to focus on? And then just really thinking about all of those different groups in your community and really trying to visualize them. So if you have a lot of young parents, they're going to be thinking about their children, and they're going to have needs around that they want their children to, learn how to read, or they want them to be ready for kindergarten, any of those issues. So really taking time to think about that and to really get a picture in your mind of those people that you're serving. And then the next step is to really try to figure out what are those things. What is it that the needs in your community that really fit the mission of your library and really fit into the strengths of the staff that you have at your organization as well. I think you need to think about all three of those things. What are those big needs, and what is it that your library is working on, and then what is your staff good at? Because if you don't have the skills in that area, it's going to be really hard to help. So I always say to dream big, which is a really good thing. And the reason that I say this is that I've worked with a lot of libraries. Sometimes I've worked with libraries in the same county that are the same size. And I can really see the difference in the organizations that are trying to dream big and that aren't mired down in the problems. And I remember two libraries that I worked with in the same county. And one of the directors was just like, she couldn't let go of the fact that her library building was old, and she didn't have a meeting space, and she just really felt like, how can I do grant work? I need a new building, and she just couldn't kind of get over that part. And the other director was really focused on the positive, and she was trying to dream big, and she was like, I know we have an old building and we don't have meeting space, but there are other organizations that we can partner with that do have meeting spaces, and so maybe we need to just bring the library out into the community a little bit now, and maybe that's what we could use grant funding for. And she was able to really build up the image of the library in her community by doing that. So I think always good to, just think about what is it that you would really love to do, and talking to your staff and finding out what they're passionate about can be a really good thing. But then, it is kind of the intersection of your dreams and reality. So dream big, but you also have to think about your organizational capacity. What are you really able to carry out? And I was at an organization one time where I was asked to write a grant for a laptop lab, and there was this whole training program, and libraries were going to borrow the laptop lab, and the person who was supposed to implement the project left the organization, and then there was a hiring freeze, so they weren't replaced. And so that laptop lab just sat there for months. Well, one day the funder turned up, and they were coming to take the laptop lab back because they could tell that the computers had never been turned on before. And the organization hadn't communicated with them to let them know all of these things that had happened. Now, they were able to talk to the funder and get them to keep the computers and to redo their project. But it's something to think about, right? How are you really going to be able to do this? And I think that's another important lesson too, is that funders are real people and they understand, but if you don't communicate with them, then they're going to move on to an organization that can help them do what they're trying to do. Okay, I did want to introduce you to the Library Funding Fairy if you haven't met her before. And the reason I bring this up, it's kind of silly, but this is one of the other real benefits that I see of grant work, is that once you start doing grant work and really getting the news out in your community what you're doing, it seems that magic money kind of seems to happen. And share in the chat if any of you have seen the Funding Fairy, if you've gotten any money from sources that you weren't expecting or additional grants. But I've seen this a lot. And one example I have is a librarian that I worked with, and she was flying to a library conference and had brought a grant with her to work on during the airplane trip. And she'd gotten promoted to first class. And so she was sitting there working on the grant proposal, and the man next to her started talking to her and asked her what she did for a living, and she said she was a librarian. And so he said, "Oh, you must read a lot of books." And she said, "Well, yeah, I do, but that's not what I do as part of my job." And so she actually talked to him about her grant, and what they were trying to do was to reach out to Spanish speakers in their community, and they had a big community who weren't using the library and didn't know about the resources there. And she lived in kind of a community that was a resort community in Arizona, so it was kind of small town but could get big town, had a lot of vacation homes and things. And the gentleman sitting next to her, turned out that he owned a vacation home in her town, and he told her that, and he said, "I've never been to the library there, and I'll tell you, I'm never going to go to the library there. But," he said, "I really believe in what it is that you're doing, and I want to help you with it." He said, I read a lot too, and I value reading, but I order my books from Amazon. But I want to help you." And so he got out his checkbook, and he actually wrote her a check right there. So that's that Funding Fairy. But then he also told her he was going to challenge his friends who had vacation homes in the community to send checks to her as well. And that did happen. She got more checks in the mail. So really, I think some of it is about just spreading that word, letting people know what you're working on. But I have so many stories of that Funding Fairy that shows up, and you guys haven't shared any. I hope the Funding Fairy has come to visit you, so share in the chat if you have any stories like that. But if not, then I guess she's due to come to Minnesota, so you should watch out. But definitely true. I have another librarian who she couldn't ever get her grant written because people would keep coming into her office and that kind of thing, and she was talking to a friend, and he said, he worked at a law firm, and there was a conference room, and he said, "We have one conference room that nobody uses very much, so if you'd like to, I could book you some time there." So she said, "Well, that would be great." So she showed up and found out why people didn't like this conference room. It was because it was in the middle of the office and it was all glass walls. So everybody could see her in there. But she was able to have a quiet place and work. But while she was in there, the other attorneys were saying, "Who is that? What is she doing?" And so they said, "Oh, it's the librarian. She's writing a grant and they're trying to do these things." And it ended up that the attorneys were really excited about it, and they ended up being Funding Fairies and giving her more funding. They told her if she got the grant, they would match the grant for her. So definitely it's true that people like to be associated with success, and I think that's some of it. They don't want to fund an organization that they think is is really struggling. You would think that people would want to, but they're scared of investing their money sometimes in an organization that's not doing well. But when they hear, oh, other people are funding them, then that can kind of be a good win for you too. Okay, so How about you all? Do you have any goals in mind right now? Any things that you're interested in writing a grant on? Thinking about those community needs. What are those big needs in your community that you're trying to accomplish? Share those in your chat. I can tell you if I have any good ideas around those. So what are the big needs in your community? What are the goals that you're working on at your library? I'll give you some time to think and write. Oh, and I did have some funding fairies. I had to scroll down, sorry. Ah, great. Local nonprofit. Memorials, great. Okay, leadership training seminars, wonderful. Okay, and Lisa shared she wants to bring an author to work with our summer school kids. Oh, that would be great. Okay, and then think about this when you're thinking about what those needs are, again, making it about the people. So the way that you would do that with these projects are to really think about why do you need leadership training? Who is it that needs leadership training? And why do the school kids need to have an author to come help them? And it's the kind of thing that, you know, sometimes as we're working in our organizations, it's clear to us, but the struggle sometimes is making it clear to a funder why these things are important. Community-wide program series focused on one book, okay, similar to the Big Read, great. A library remodel, new furniture and technology. Add to literacy, great, yep. There you go, yeah. Students would learn about the writing process, so they need to learn more about writing. STEM, okay, great. Good. All right, so I really do encourage you that to try to kind of put your planning for your grant work up front. And the next step in that is to think about what assets do you have. So once you've figured out what you're working towards, thinking about who do you have, what do you have that can really help you with this project. It can be really good to think about who else in your community is working on these kind of things, who else of your staff or your board or your volunteers have skills in these areas. That can be really good. I do like to say that it's always really good to have a grant team if you can. And it doesn't matter the size of your organization. You can really do this if you think about the fact that you can use community members to help you, and you can use volunteers to help you. I had one library that actually put an ad in the newspaper asking for a grant writer. They'd never written grants before, and it ended up that they had somebody who retired and moved to their community, and he was looking for a way to get more involved in the community, and he'd spent his whole career as a grant writer. And he said, you know, I never would have thought, I wanted to volunteer somewhere, but I never would have thought of the library. I didn't know that libraries wrote grants. So you never know who might be out there. And I think if you look at, you know, who do you have internally that can help with this work, and then think about, you know, what is it that we need help with? What are we not very good at? Whether it's, you know, the organizational part of it, keeping track of deadlines and that kind of thing, or being the writer, or connecting with other partners and that kind of thing. You know, maybe you have somebody on your board who's really connected that can help with that. I've even seen libraries that have used teams to do some of the research that's involved, you know, really finding out what grants are out there or what funders are out there. So you can get really creative with this. But usually your grant proposal is much stronger if it's not just you working on it, if you really have somebody else that you can work with. And then I would say everybody that is working with the grants in your library, really good for them to all have an elevator speech, you know, that kind of thing, like the woman on the airplane used, where you're able to tell and share with other people what you're working on, because that can be really powerful. I even had somebody who I told this to, and so she just started sharing with people about the grant that they were working on. And she told her neighbor, they were both outside gardening, and she told her neighbor that they were working on a grant at the library for a nonprofit, and it turned out that the neighbor's husband is on the board of the nonprofit that's giving the grants out. So that ended up being a great connection. But sometimes you don't know about those connections unless you have people really out there talking about it. So definitely good to make sure everybody is doing that as well. Okay, so another thing that's really important are partnerships. And I like to call this friend raising sometimes. I once had a state librarian who told me that, you know, you need your partners before you know you need them sometimes. So just keep building those friendships. And grant work really is a lot about relationships. You're building relationships with the funder. You're building relationships with partners. And a lot of funders do require that you have a partner these days, so something really good to keep in mind. And that's just because they know that you have more likelihood of success if you're working with another organization. You have more resources. You have, you know, you're keeping each other on track maybe a little bit, but definitely something to think about. And with these partnerships, really think about how you can make it a win-win situation. You know, not just going and asking them for something, but what is it that you can contribute as well. And like I said, as you all were joining and sharing where you're from, there are some great cross organizations here that you could really partner together on. Partnerships between libraries and museums or cultural organizations can be really powerful, or even between different types of libraries. And sometimes there are grants that, you know, only public libraries can apply for, or only school libraries can apply for. But if you partner together, then you can both take part in that partnership as well. So I've got some examples here of potential library partners, and share in the chat if you have any of these as partners, or share if there's others that don't fit into these groups that you have as partners. So who in this list do you partner with already, or are there ones that I haven't shared? Okay, SAMMIE and the public library have been partners. Great. Okay, wonderful. Some of the SAMMIE libraries work together already to bring in authors. Okay. Yeah, and then definitely think about some of these other organizations. You know, always really good to partner with other public organizations, other government agencies that are doing the same kind of work. You know, if you're working on literacy, thinking about who else in your community is interested in helping people with literacy, or if you're working with teen volunteers, who else works with teens. That can be really good. And then definitely think about community service organizations. And they can be partners, or they can be funders, or both. But most of those organizations, you know, they're formed to give back to the community. And so they can be great partners with libraries as well. And then of course your local businesses, Chamber of Commerce. Also great to think about the media being a partner. You know, the media, they're always looking for stories, and especially good stories these days. They can find enough of the bad stories on their own, but you know, sometimes those good stories are hard to find, and we often have those in the library. So partnering with them, building relationships with reporters can be a really good thing to do. Okay, great. So definitely think about that some. And then going on to our fourth step is really thinking about how you're going to go forward. And I also like to say focusing on success and not survival. So that goes back to that mindset again. But really thinking about that you will be successful in this. You know, whether it's not through the first grant, but you will be able to do that, I think is important. But I definitely say baby steps are okay as we start off. And that is what I see, is that if somebody doesn't get started on any of this, that a couple months down the line, they haven't gone anywhere. But I've seen people that they work on their grant 1 hour a week, which may not seem like a lot of time, but it's enough that you can spare. It's not overwhelming. But at the end of 6 months, you've spent a lot of time on grant work, just adding up those hours. And I do like to say deadlines aren't optional. So with this work, really important to set deadlines for yourself by which you want to get something done. A lot of times with grants, they kind of pop up and you might not have a lot of time to get them done. But if you really start by planning to start with, thinking through what is it that you want to work on, really developing those project ideas, then you're going to be ready when that grant opportunity comes up. So remember I told you it's all about the people, right? So your grant project, really what you're doing is it's that answer for the compelling issue that exists in your community. It's that need, and how are you going to answer it, right? Thinking about those people, the demographics, who's using your library, who's not using your library, but who can help, and how you're going to help them through your grant project. So let's move on to the next section, really talking more about designing winning grant projects. So again, making it about the people. Your project helps people. But often when we think about what are our needs, we frame it as about the stuff, right? So we say the library needs computers. Well, it's not the library that needs computers, and funders, that's not a great selling point to them. Okay, so the library needs computers. Why does the library need computers? Really, we're still trying to get often to funders what it is that we do, what our work is. I always end up telling a few mother-in-law stories because she sets them up for me so well. But I remember a couple of Christmases ago, we went to visit my mother-in-law, and she had her Kindle out on the table, and she said, "Oh, I meant to hide that before you came." And I said, "Hide it? Why?" And she said, "Oh, well, I figure e-readers, e-books, it must be like cheating on books for libraries." And so, of course, not at all true, right? We've embraced this. This is one of the services that we offer. But still, a lot of people don't know about it. So still a lot of people don't know that computers are needed. She also told me that she couldn't understand why libraries would need computers, that she thought people needed jobs, so the money should be going to people who need jobs. And I had to explain to her, well, to get a job these days, you need to have a computer, and a lot of people still don't have computers in their homes. So really trying to bring that back around. So instead of making it about the thing, making it about the people. So why is there a need for computers? Why are people coming in to your library to use the computers? So is it that you have people that are unemployed and they come into your library, they need to find the jobs, they need to write a resume, they need to submit the job online, all of those things. Maybe you have students who can't complete their homework unless they have a computer. I know my daughter is in 4th grade, and I think starting in 2nd grade she had homework that needed a computer for. So definitely starts early. Or maybe you have seniors that come in and they have a new prescription or a diagnosis and they want to find out more information. Or again, that everybody still, when they get those e-readers for Christmas, we still have them coming in to our libraries and needing help with that. So really trying to, again, make that about the people is really helpful. So when you're thinking about designing winning grants project, I think it's kind of these 3 things. So starting with any strategic plans or needs assessments that you might have. I had one librarian who was starting off in grant work, and she said, I'm having a hard time thinking about my grant project and what it should be. And I said, well, does your library have a strategic plan? And she said, well, yeah, she was a branch manager. She said, I really haven't looked at it in a long time. It's a 5-year plan. And I said, well, go look at it and look at the goals, see if there's activities, see if there's anything, that stands out for you. And she called me later and she said, Stephanie, I was looking at the strategic plan, and it has everything laid out. It has goals, it has objectives. You know, these are all things, there are lots of grant projects that could happen and fit into this strategic plan. She said, I feel like it's cheating. Like, can I just use this information? And you know, I said, it's not cheating. And your library director, when you go to her and propose this grant project, is going to be more likely to want to support you if you're showing how it fits into your strategic plan. So definitely take a look at that. And if your library doesn't have one, or even if it does, look at strategic plans, again, that your community might have. That can be really useful. And then I think really important to have community involvement. So when you do decide what it is that you're working on, finding out more about those people and what it is that they need. You know, we might say, okay, we want to have an early literacy project. Well, go and talk to some parents with young kids then and find out what would work best for them. I had a library that was working on a summer reading program, and they wanted to do a series and have kids come once a month and really help them get ready for kindergarten. But they were really worried about how do we get these kids to the library every week, right? And every month. And so they ended up deciding to run that program through a summer care program that wasn't currently doing very much kindergarten readiness kind of thing. So they had kind of a captive audience. So sometimes really thinking through, you know, how is it that we can best help the people, and really talking to them can be really useful. And then the third part, I think, is just creative brainstorming, coming up with some of these ideas. I feel like this is kind of the fun part that you can do, really thinking creatively, whether you're using design thinking or whatever it is that you're doing, to really try to brainstorm on how you can go about meeting those needs at your library. And then the other really big part of it is just project planning. And it's the same kind of planning that you do for a summer reading program or putting on an exhibit or any kind of thing, any kind of event or project, even one in your personal life, you know, planning a wedding or a big event. You start, you know, you have your goals and objectives, figuring out what you want to do, how you're going to get there, what are the specific things you need to do, the outcomes, how are you going to really change the people and help the people, and then thinking through a timeline. How are you going to get all these things done? Do you need to hire people? Do you need to buy things? You know, if it's a training or something like that, when is it going to happen? And then thinking about how much it's going to cost, all these different parts. And then coming up with an evaluation plan. And sometimes funders will give you a lot of tips on what they want to see in an evaluation plan, so that's something to think about. But really just trying to show how you're successful is part of that. Now this is another good time to look and to say, you know, okay, I feel like at our organization we're really good about doing these kind of things, but maybe we're not as good at these other kind of things. Maybe evaluation is hard for us. So maybe that would be where you put out a call for volunteers or other staff or partnering organizations. You know, if you find out there's somebody at another library that's good at that, really thinking about that. I was working on a grant one time, and I had someone who came and said that she wanted to help me to be able to learn more about grant work. And I said, oh, well, that's great. How about you work on the budget? Because I don't really like working on the budget. And she was like, oh, that would be fabulous. And she was really excited about it. And so we did get the grant, and the funder actually said that they really appreciated the budget because they could tell that it had been really thoroughly researched. I mean, she researched the cost of everything and had great, you know, proof of what things would cost, and had really thought through it all. So like I said, that's another instance where having somebody else involved can really make your grant proposal better that way. So let's talk a little bit about grant projects. So share in the chat, what do you think makes a good grant project? If you haven't written grants before, you can just kind of think about any kind of project. A lot of it is similar, like I said. And those of you that have been involved with grant work, this is a good time for you to share what you know too. What makes a good grant project is the question. Thank you for asking too. Okay, and think about what funders might want. There's a big hint on your screen too. Okay, having an achievable goal, very good, yeah. Measurable outcomes, good. A good team, good, yeah. Okay, I can see you typing away. Yeah, so the hint on the screen is innovation, and this is something that a lot of funders are are interested in, right? They like you to spend their money trying something new out, being kind of innovative. And sometimes what you can do is ask for funding that does do something innovative, but also ask for funding to kind of sustain things that you're already doing at the same time. So I've seen libraries that maybe they do an innovative project, but then they also ask for, maybe they're doing a STEM project and doing some science things, but then they also ask for funding to buy new books for their science department. And kind of combine things that way as well. Okay, great. Excited participants. Wonderful, yeah. And that does make a difference. Collaboration, very good. Responsive to the needs of the community, very good. It's all about the people, right? You're going to get a star at the end of this. Okay. So you've got most of these, I think, here. A couple of other things, creating a model that can be replicated. That's something that funders often like to see, that they would be able to fund something that then another library or organization could take what you've learned and also do it. Something that maximizes resources. Having, let's see, what else do you have? Reasonable budgets and realistic timelines. That can really make things work smoothly as well. Evaluation plan, causing a change in the people. And then sustainability is another one. So sometimes funders are really interested in seeing that the work is going to carry on as well. Okay, good. Thank you for thinking through that. So I have some examples here of library grant projects that I've seen funded that have been highlighted in some of our books. And I would love for you to share in the chat grant projects that you've had funded as well. This is really useful as we're starting grant work to think about what are the projects out there that have been funded by libraries or other organizations as well. So I'll share a couple of these, and you can feel free to share in the chat as I'm talking. The one at the top I really like. This is a county in Pima County is in Tucson, Arizona. And they had an interesting situation. They were trying to meet teen needs. And so they invested a lot in their library, but they still weren't getting teens to come in. So they had a focus group with the teens, and they said, what is it that you need that, what is it that you need, really trying to keep it about them again. And they said, well, we always need help with our homework. Well, the library had a new homework center. They had online tutors. They already had all of that. And so then they said, well, we like graphic novels and, magazines and all of these kind of things that our parents won't buy us. And they were like, oh, we have a huge collection. And it just seemed like everything that the teens were bringing up were things the library was already doing. So next, one of the librarians said, well, you tell us, what do you think we could do? How can we get teens to come to the library? And one of them said, well, we could tell our friends. And out of that grew a really big grant. They got a grant for a couple $100,000 to do a teen advocate program. So they actually had the teens go out and talk to their friends. But they helped them develop a presentation, and then they paid them $100 per presentation. And they did about 3 presentations per per teen. Some of them liked doing it so much they went on and did more, but they just had to talk to any group of teens. So whether it was a class or a sports group or scout group, any of those. And this ended up being a really successful project. Of course, better for the teens to be telling each other than for us to be going in and telling them. They got so involved, one group even made a video that they would show, and every time a librarian showed up on screen, there'd be a big, star around her, doo-doo-doo, and definitely the true meaning of advocacy, having somebody else speak on your behalf. This has been sustained. The Friends of the Library now keep this going, and it's been going on for years. They've had some teens that have gone to library school as a result, so a really successful project. Some of these, I don't see you guys sharing in the chat any of your grants. Maybe I'm not seeing them. Try to scroll down. Okay. So share in the chat any grants that you've gotten. You guys said at the beginning that some of you have gotten 10 grants. All right. So share in there. What are the grant projects that you've gotten? It does help us. Down here at the bottom, Arizona, this was in Glendale, Arizona, which they get a lot of Minnesotans coming down in the winter, and one of the community needs they recognized that people kept asking for gardening help, and of course very different having a garden in Arizona than Minnesota. And so what they did was they did a project where they got quite a few grants and quite a few partners. So their other issue was that their grounds weren't really well kept. So they got an organization to come in and do xeriscaping, low water design for their gardens, but then they also got an LSTA grant, a technology grant from the state library to have listening wands. So that's what those gentlemen are holding. And they can basically point to the plants and it will tell you about how they best grow and where you would have them and a little bit about them. So I thought that was a really innovative grant. So sometimes, thinking about what are people coming in and asking a lot about and how can we help them with that can be a really good way to go. Some of these other ones have been really community projects. The Neighbors Connecting was a great project with a lot of different organizations working together to really recognize the differences in their communities and bring them together. Okay, I can see you sharing in here now. Video equipment for filmmaking, wonderful. Small and simple grants for supplies, prizes, food to host, programming. Hey, I love those kind of grants. Sometimes they are really easy to write, but they do really make a big difference. Okay, great. An LSTA grant. Oh, lots of grants. Now you guys are sharing. Great. Programming grants. Okay, good. And a SAMMIE grant for a makerspace. Wonderful. Films. Okay, great, good. You guys are doing some great work. Thank you for sharing those. It's always, you never know. You might share one and it might be just what somebody else was looking for. Okay, so now we're ready to start talking about funders. And I'm going to go really quickly through these slides just because I did want to give you an overview, but this could be, its own webinar in itself. And this is what your handout has, so don't worry about trying to copy any of this down. All these are in your handout as well. The one thing I want to tell you about when you're thinking about funders is, not getting too attracted to those big giant grants, because sometimes those can be a lot of work, and if you're just starting off, those might not be good. But really taking that time to think about your project and your budget and what it is that you need first, then you can really find a funder that's a good match. So this photo is of my daughter years ago when we did live in Arizona. They have fake pumpkin patches there. So they basically take the pumpkins and sprinkle them around the desert and you ride out there. Very different from our pumpkin patches here in Seattle. But we got off the tractor and she said, oh, look at all these pumpkins. Can I have any one I want? And I mean, look, she's really cute. So I said, sure, you can have any pumpkin you want. Well, they had some giant pumpkins. And of course, they charged by the pound. So I was a little worried. But she walked around and she found this pumpkin. And she said, I want this one. It's just my size. I can carry it. So this is what I want you to think about when you're looking at grants, is finding one that you can carry, that does match your organizational capacity. Okay, so there's two main categories of grants, government grants and private grants. So again, quickly I'm going to go through the government grants. So with federal grant sources, the largest federal funder, of course, is IMLS, Institute for Museum and Library Services. And then you have other federal grants as well that you should definitely look at. Of course, it depends on your institution, but even the U.S. Department of Education, whether you're at a school library or if you're at a public library, sometimes you can partner together on those. The National Library of Medicine has some good grants available as well. The Department of Housing and Urban Development has block grant programs. The National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities have some great grants that aren't too difficult even to apply. Now all of these grants you can find by visiting grants.gov. That's the one source where all the federal grants are, and that is where you will apply for all of the grants. But I've got a screenshot here of the IMLS website as well. I do really like going to the individual organization as well. I find it a lot easier to look at their grants. So they'll usually have a tab or something that you can look at. This is a screenshot from the National Library of Medicine. So you can see at the top they have a funding. I don't know why. They just redid their website and I was hoping it would be better. But they have a lot of grants that are available for consumer health information kind of grants that often go unfunded. And they also have kind of just anything you can think about health and education grants that can be really useful. But they have grants through their big organization. But then also if you click on regions that I highlighted here, you can see that you can also go by region as well and click on your region to find out more about that funding. So you're in the greater Midwest region. And so then within that region, you'll have funding opportunities as well. So sometimes I think that's easier than going through grants.gov, looking at those individually. So then, of course, you also have state and local government sources, so definitely take a look at those. They'll be less competitive than the federal ones. Some of the federal grants have million-dollar grants, but they are really competitive, and the grants are hundreds of pages long. So definitely look locally as well. Some of you have shared some of the funders that you've used. Definitely share that in the chat as well. But also looking at your own city and state government can be a great resource as well. All of these different departments have grants available. Sometimes the grant money kind of trickles down. So maybe something happened where the state didn't spend all the money in a grant that they have, so they need to roll it out. So maybe they say, oh, let's give it to cities and see if they have any need for preservation grants or that kind of thing. So this is where those partnerships are really important, making those, getting to know people that work at these organizations and letting them know what the library is involved with. If you are wanting to do preservation or environment or any of those kind of grants, can be really good to let people know that you have those interests. And then private funding sources is kind of everything else. So really good to think about foundations. There are all kinds of different sizes of foundations that are available, but they are set up to give grants. A great resource is foundationcenter.org. They are a nonprofit and they are set up to help people find foundation grants, so they have a lot of great resources and free tools available. They also have funding information networks that are available in libraries, so they can be a great resource to go visit as well. And then community foundations. So in Minnesota you have 27 community foundations. They are another great source for local grants and local funding, so definitely reach out to those. The Ezra Jax Keats Foundation, this is just an example of a foundation website. Their grant deadline is coming up, I think maybe end of March. And they have mini grants, and they are really easy. Some of these grants are so easy to fill out. You know, you can see the template here. It's just typing in that information about your program and what you're going to be doing. So some of them can be not too overwhelming. And then, of course, thinking about corporate grants. So a lot of corporations and local businesses give grants as well. So definitely take a look at that and think locally. Think about your local bank, your local grocery store, your Target. All of those big box stores have grants available as well. And then also ALA, of course, and PLA and SLA, all of the different library organizations have grants available. These are all located on your handout, so I'm just going to go through these. And then these are my easy grants for beginners. So the Ezra Jack Keats that I've got there, Target store grants, they have to give funding every month. Lieber Foundation, Dollar General, a lot of these are really good. And I do have all of these listed on my Library Grants blog, which I am going to update in the next couple of days. I'm a little behind on that, but this has been my volunteer project for a few years now, librarygrants.blogspot.com. Okay, I know we're at the top of the hour, but we started a little late, so I'm just going to keep going. So I do want to mention that funders aren't ATMs. And that they are people. So sometimes we just think about, who's the funder, who am I writing this grant to, but really thinking about developing a relationship with these people as well. It's really okay to check in with them, to talk to them. If you find a grant that you want to apply for, go ahead and try to contact them. Ask them, if they will review your grant. Sometimes they will do that. I know I've done that before working at state libraries and other organizations, nonprofits that have given grants. If somebody contacted me way before the deadline, I was happy to help them and to look over their grant proposal for them. So now going into the last couple of phases here, writing the winning proposal. So if you've done your planning ahead of time, then you've organized a lot of this information already. But a few tips I have here for you, and definitely share in the chat any tips that you have. But one thing is, again, keeping it about the people and thinking about how do you tell that story of the people that will be helped. And it's okay to really share why you're excited about it, why you're excited about what you do, having that passion, but then backing up with facts. And I'll never forget, I had a librarian who was trying to write a grant proposal, and she just kept saying, well, kids need books. That was the need of the community. Kids need books. And I said, well, how do you want to do this? Well, I want to get books for the kids. And she really was having a hard time telling the story. And I said, well, what's really going on? Like, why do you think kids need books in your community? And she said, oh, Stephanie, let me tell you, there are children in our community that have no books in their home at all. And so what I want to do is I want to get a grant where we buy the books and we give them to the kids, and they can write their name in it. They can start their own collection. They can read it as many times as they want. Well, telling me that story, I was like, this is great, but this is what you have to put in your grant proposal, right? So sometimes when we go to put it down on paper, we forget about that passion part. Think about your audience who's going to be reading the grant. Keep them in mind the whole time, not having lingo that they might not understand, but also doing your research, really trying to find a good match. What is the funder interested in? What are their priorities? And then never submit a grant that you haven't gotten feedback on. So have somebody else write it. You don't want typos and those kind of things. And then really asking for everything that you need is a really important part. So thinking about that project and making sure that you have everything you need to be successful. So I had one grant that was actually for laptop labs, and I had one library who asked just for the laptop lab. Another asked for the laptop lab, but they also asked for funding to hire somebody from the local community college to come and teach classes to the public, develop the curriculum, and then teach their library staff how to do the grant work as well. How to do the training as well. So we funded both grants. Oh, they even asked for a charging station for the laptops. So we funded both grants, but you can see the one organization got a lot more out of it. So really thinking about that. What do you really need to be successful? And then just staying positive. So all the way through with the wording of the grant, really wording it that we will achieve this, we will be able to do this, I think is a really important part of it as well. But just really believing that you can get it down. So these are some common grant components that I just wanted to show you. Definitely, you'll have a grant proposal. The most important thing is that you really follow what they've given you and don't rearrange things. Make it easy for the reviewers. And this is the kind of thing that maybe you can split up a little bit, or that you can ask the funder for clarification and help with as well. Okay, going into our last part now. So now, hopefully you've gotten the grant. If you got the grant, then it's time to celebrate. Do take some time to really celebrate. Also take time to thank the funder. Again, thinking about that they're not just ATMs, that they are real people and they do want to hear from you. And then telling the appropriate people, especially if you're in a university, a college setting, a lot of times you've probably communicated and gotten approval already, but making sure that everybody knows, sending out a press release, really making sure that the community knows what you're doing. And then you have to start the real work. If you're not funded, don't give up. Sometimes you can ask for the reviewers' comments. Sometimes you can just think of a new way to do it. And revise and resubmit it, or sometimes you can just use that same approach and try another funding source. So definitely keep trying. I have one last success story to share with you. This is Angel Fire, New Mexico. So I worked many years ago when the Gates Foundation was first starting up. I traveled around the U.S. and we trained librarians on their first computers. So this was a little town that didn't have a real library. They had one room in the back of the fire department. They had a volunteer who made a computer desk out of an old door. And we did training and we brought them 2 public access computers, their first ones in their town. And as a result, the volunteers, it was all volunteer run, they decided to get a library built. And so they started all kinds of fundraising. But there was one older woman who was a volunteer, and she decided that what she was going to do was write grants. And she'd never written a grant before, but she decided she would just try one a month. And so she started off and she wrote 12 grants that year, and I think she got 10 out of the 12. And she said it did get easier as she went on, and one funder would tell her about another funder. The buzz in the community got somebody to donate the land, and so this is their library building now. So it really is possible to really dream big and get those things done through your grant work. So as we're wrapping up today, I'd love for you to share what you learned during this last hour. And the reason I have you do this is, as adult learners, it helps us to remember it. So share in the chat something you learned, something that you want to remember, whether it's from me or from somebody that shared in the chat. But what do you want to make sure that you remember? It helps our brains to be able to write that down. And it's a good little review for all of us. Okay, yay, Aubrey got it. Focus on the people. Okay, and while you're typing, as I mentioned, there is a handout that I think you've gotten that has all that information. And let's have you share a few more things. Let's see if we can get at least 5 things that you want to remember or learned. Have a story to tell. Great. Okay, new partners. Yay. Okay, think local. Oh, good. I'm glad you got that out of it. Definitely. Yeah, those are so much less competitive, and those funders are wanting to give to the community. So, great. The main thing, the main thing. Yeah, focus on the people. Good. Good. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Margaret. Well, good luck to all of you with your grant work. As Miller Fuller said, I've tried raising money by asking for it and not asking for it, and I always got more from asking for it, and that's what we're doing with grant work, so don't be afraid to go out there and try it. These are my books, and the latest one, like I said, just came out. It's called Winning Grants. So thank you all for attending, and thank you for your hard work that you're doing in your organizations, and I do hope that you do have good luck with your grants. And my email address is there, stephaniegerding@gmail.com. Feel free to email me if you have more questions.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was wonderful. And this will be it has been recorded. It will be put online soon for everyone to see. And thank you, everyone, for coming.
Great. Thank you.